Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a seaside cottage on the Isles of Scilly. I've drawn it in pencil so you can see what I'm doing, but we'll rub it back before I paint each area. I'm starting with the sky, which I'm using cerulean blue for, and I'm making it solid at the top. I will put a list of the paints I'm using and hints and tips in the description. So I'm coming across, trying to fill as much sky as possible because I want the white clouds to show. So going round those, and I'll deal with them separately. I only put them in as a hint. When you do things like this, you accidentally paint over some of them. But it's just a good way of starting off a summer sky. Try and get everything covered while it's still wet. Then coming down as a more interesting layer of clouds, and the sky is a lighter colour, so I'm just going to dab off the brush. There's still some residue of paint on the brush, and just go round, and again just touch the ones that I did earlier, just give a softer edge to them. And often at the coast there's a layer of clouds that hug the land. They're down to the horizon. Now I'm going to use Naples yellow because it's very light sand, but I'm going to tint it with some Azilian crimson to make it slightly biscuit coloured, and then let it down, and I can add highlights to it later on. And I've got dune grass to put in, but I just want to cover the white paper up to where the wall goes. And today I'm starting by using an oil painting I did of this spot for reference, so you can see the difference and how it works in one medium and another. Just changing the colour slightly. And I've got shadows to put under the boats, and it goes down to the water. I'm moving back to the cottage, which has got lots of interesting colours on the roof and chimney. I'm going to make an orangey colour for the ridge tiles and the chimney pot by mixing Indian red and chrome orange, but you could use anything that will just make it sing out against the blue. On the sky, I'm just going to add a little bit more blue to it. Keep adjusting the mix until you've got it to the shade that suits what you're doing. I'll go back into that piece of weatherboarding a little bit more. Now the building itself is made of local stone, which seems to be the same as the garden wall. So to start with, I'm going to put the garden wall in. So I'm just going to rub that back a bit. You just get a putty rubber, and if you touch the pencil, it just pulls it up a little bit. So the stone wall, I'm going to use Naples yellow and a little bit of the blue and Payne's grey from the roof, because I want harmony with all the colours. And there's sideways areas, and then the top stones are put on the other way around so that they're sticking up. Just drop in up and down pieces. Now I need to separate that into stone, so I'm just going to use the point of the brush and just drop in a little bit of grey every now and again. And then moving on, there's a bush going up to a piece of stone that's showing it's quite curved. Then the other side, it looks like the wall might have fallen down. It's all sorts of different shapes and things. So I'm just going to put some gate posts in that are obvious, and then drop in slightly darker colour for the wall. And it goes all the way down to where they've done more repairs with concrete. So I'm just doing random edge. Now going further down, it looks more like modern concrete, so I'm just going to mix all the colours together, put something in with straighter edges. It's quite light, so I'm going to add a little bit of Naples yellow to it just to lighten it, and then there'd be dark stone around it where it's been stained by things that are growing on when it's submerged. And there's another platform of concrete further up. Moving on to the headland in the distance, which is rock on the right hand side, and then it changes to grass. So I'm going to put the rock in, and it's quite dark in places. I want it to be brown. I want it to be warm against the sea. So I'm just going to drop a little bit in. I will put a second coat on that, but you need to start somewhere. And then there's lots of rocks on the hillside. It's absolutely dotted with them. So I just stick some grey in to claim the space. And then going to need a warm green because it's catching the sun. So I'm mixing sap green and chrome yellow to start with, and then I can put darker foliage in around it. So I'm just going down the hillside. Doesn't matter if the brush skips a little bit. Round the stones that I put in, and the grass goes all the way to the end, even though there's rocks there. So I'll just mix up some Naples yellow and the roof colour together and just drop some in and then work it together with the water. So I've got separated areas. I'm just going to join them up because again that's catching the sun. It needs to be quite light and it's surrounded by plants, so that can dry in a moment. But what I'm going to do is, while it's still wet, just drop a tiny bit of stronger colour in every now and again, as I did with the wall, and then go back to the grey and drop a tiny bit of that in just every now and again, and then use the water to make it more subtle. And I want a reasonable edge, so I'm just going to put a straight edge on for now. So moving forward, the bottom of the rock is quite brown. It's seaweed and all sorts of things, so I'm going to mix up some burnt sienna and indigo, or any dark colour that you've got, and just drop some brown in at the bottom, make it a little bit darker. It's not going everywhere, but just a few little places. Just make it look like a tide line, and then comes out a little bit. So I'll just skip the lines out a little. I'm going to use some water now, just gently encourage them to merge a little bit, and then take them up so that the shows that the wall and stones are slightly stained. To put the plants in, I want to really put the parasol and table and chairs in first, and put the green parasol in, which I'm using Viridian, which I'm going to soften because it's a little bit sun bleached, with some Naples yellow, and just put the top cap in first, and then do a line on the right and a line on the left, and then a couple more, and then use a little bit of the sky blue and just drop it in between. I can put the shadows in afterwards, but I've got the sign of a well-used parasol. The table and chairs are wooden, so again just the brown, and just put in square backs. Oh, there's another one there. If you just make squares and put the plants up to them. So now I need the table and the parasol stand, and I'm just going to get a little bit of burnt sienna, just make a lighter couple of slats in the chairs. I've got dune grass going over them, and I've got little plants on the top of the wall, and then there's a bit of a hedge going into it. I've just blocked the plants in and a bit more of the hillside, and I'm coming back to that later. And I'm now doing the palm trees with grey trunks. I'm just taking them from bottom to top. And I've got two next to each other here. And then a smaller one in the distance goes out at a V. And they've got the sun hitting them one side, so I'm just going to get the tiniest amount of Naples yellow and just put it on the right hand side, just to show where the sun's coming from. And then the branches, or the palm fronds, are going out like spears, so I need to mix up quite a grey green colour. So I'll mix some of the homemade grey with the green and just go gently. So you've got to decide on the length you're putting them in and get them all to match if you can. Some of them will be bent all different directions. And in a moment I'll stick something yellow in to break it up. Some of them are quite dark. Just do everything out from the middle to infinity, and then change colour to something more yellowy. Just slip a few yellow ones in. It makes it look more three-dimensional, and the yellow isn't so transparent, so it make it look more bushy. Just go very gently. Don't try and rush, otherwise they grow in size. And quite a bit of shadow in one area, so I'm just going to go into the top and the left with a bit more shadow. I'm just going to drop some in. And now moving it on, I'm back to the headland again at the back. I now need to show more detail on the headland. Just go over the skyline in places and just make it a tiny bit darker. Nothing too drastic. And taking the brush up with the way that the island's formed. Slight angle and from top to bottom. Not covering everywhere, quite a steep angle. And then more dark on the ridge, so I'm just adding some of the brown mixed to the ridge. And then lots of stones and nondescript areas, so I'm just going to use some different colours and just drop them in. And there is an area that is quite bright, so I'm just going to get some chrome yellow, dilute it quite a lot, and just drop it in. Now I can put the beach on the nearer island, Naples yellow with a little bit of crimson, and just drop that in. The shape of the rock and the colour. And the same over here, I can just tint this bit a little bit more. And there's not much of a line showing between them, so I'm just going to get a little bit more dark, just make a slight line. Show the difference in the two islands. I'm ready for the water nearly. I've got a few rocks to put in, so I'll do those first. Let's make it a rough shape of the rock, and then I can add a different colour. Lots of these have got lichen on, so just getting some Indian yellow, or you could use yellow ochre, and just dropping that in. And then the other side, I'm just going to use the grey mix that I had earlier, and then I'll drop some Naples yellow on that just to give a difference. And the chimney has got a black line where it's in shadow, and then a lot of lichen on top. So I'm just going to do the shadow on top, and there's also a shadow at the bottom of the roof where it goes into the gutter. It all helps define it. And then just put some very weak colours on for the stone on the chimney. Just move them around a little bit, take some of it off. I can put some on top, and then I can add some bright yellow to that shortly. I'm now mixing up some French ultramarine and cerulean blue, just going through this little channel here behind the plants, leaving room for the plants. And then when I've got the space, dropping in some darker colour so it floods the area that I've already found. And then taking that colour to the horizon, and then back and around the beach. And there's a dark V that goes in between the two islands of water. Bring it back here a bit. A little bit more viridian, keep it nice and strong. Just drop it in, and then that'll make the nearer water look lighter. And around the rocks, and I need to change it to turquoise as it comes closer. So I'm just going around a few yachts, and there is a distinct change in colour. Where it comes to shallower water and perhaps a more sheltered spot. That's almost a sandbank there, so I'm just going to add some Naples yellow. Just drop it in to show that there's a sandbar there. And then go back with cerulean blue mixed with cobalt turquoise. Any turquoise will do, and a tiny bit of viridian. There's a little boat at the quay. I'm going to use water just to bring that forward and reduce the intensity of the paint. And there is a tiny colour change above the quay, just to show some continuity there. And then coming forward, it almost changes to purple. But I don't want to distract from the colours we've got, so I'm going to just use this slightly lighter and add some more French ultramarine. And just make a very, very clear colour that's showing the sand underneath. And I've got dark seaweed to put there, which will help, but I'm just trying to get a clear line here where the water is just lapping up to the beach. And there's dark water that comes on top of this, which is probably because there's seaweed there or something. So I just need to make a few strokes. And then when it's dry, I can tidy up any areas where the paint skipped and put the yachts in. Whilst I've been waiting for things to dry, I've just put exactly the same colour at the top of the sky, but stopped it at the clouds. Just to, when I put the turquoise sea in, it changes all the colour values, so you need to keep adjusting as you're going along. I'm just putting a little bit of dark on the headland, the island, and the second island, just to show the difference between them. Looking at the boats that I've got in, and the only way you can do it is to draw them in the negative and put the sea round them in a boat shape. So you've got to decide which way you want them to be pointing. Put a line on the bottom, pointy front and a round back. Then just bring the blue in a little bit to show that there's something there. Over here, there's one. Let's make the mast area a bit narrower. And then there's a little one mooring at the quay. Put a dark line under the bottom of it. And then it's out from the jetty slightly. And it's got a little cabin and the boat is lower at the back. So it's just given us a little suggestion of them. And then to give better visual impact, where the paint has skipped around the rocks a little bit with the quite rough paper, I'm just going to go back with a little brush, just fill in some of the holes, and that gives better visual impact to the boats. Now coming down to the quay, there's lots of brown seaweed, so I'm just mixing burnt sienna with some of the green, the sap green I had earlier for the back area, and I'm just going to drop it in sideways. A little bit more brown and some indigo just to make it look really wet and dark. Water it down a little bit and then just drop that in on top as well, just at random. And then some of it's floating here, so it's not straight lines, it's just, and that comes all the way up to the corner here. Gives more distance to the picture to make it slightly more detailed, and it comes round the corner, so I'm going to put it coming round the corner because it all helps. And I'm going to get a flat brush with just water on it and just gently pull out the edges to make them softer. Now the seaweed actually goes up the wall, ready for when the tide comes in, so it's round some of the rocks. So I'm just doing little circles with the brush, just soften them slightly, and then coming onto the dinghies, and then I can get all the colours to match. I started painting this picture with the oil painting. The paint around the top of the dinghies would match the colour of the sea, and I just couldn't make that up. So I'm now going to try and do the same. So when you're doing a boat, most important thing is to have the rear of it square. Then it comes to a point. The points might not look even depending on how you're looking at the boat. And then there's always a seat at the back, or usually somewhere near the back, so you put a straight line down, make sure that's straight, and go across again. And there's probably a shadow to go with it. This one is a plastic mould made boat, but it's got planking into the mould to make it look like an old wooden one. I'm just going to put some lines round going to the point. This is very watered down Payne's grey, and take them back a little bit. Then I'm going to put some water on top just to soften them slightly. Some of them have got shadows, and then putting a tissue on top, put some kitchen roll on, and then I can put a few shadows on in a minute, but it's just softened it fractionally. And the next one, that seems almost the same make, slightly different design, but it's a different aspect. It's on its trolley differently, so the back is higher, and then the front is very down, slightly lost in the grass. So part of the side is lost under the first boat. Put the seat in, and this one's got triangles holding the back together. Now this first one's dried off a bit, so I can make it a bit brighter. If it's a small area on rag paper, you often need to touch it twice just to get it exactly right, as the paint soaks in. And then this third one is an inflatable boat, and it's got an outboard motor on, so there's a propeller at the back, and then there's a shaft, and then there's a box that holds the engine. And they usually have got some sort of advertising or a name on. So I'm just going to put some black in and then change it to bluey grey to make it a bit lighter. And because they usually have writing or a name on, I'm just going to take some of the paint off a little bit. And that's got navy blue stripes. I'll put one on. The other one's not visible from this side, but the one halfway down is. Recharge the brush. And then there's shadows that make it look inflated. So I'm just going to put a little bit of dark underneath. And again, it's very light, so I'm going to take that back with a tissue. And it's lost in the grass, but I'm just going to put a couple of seats in first, just to show the width of the vessel. And whilst I'm there, there's some lovely wooden oars in the other two. So I'm going to mix raw and burnt sienna together to make a nice warm wood colour so that the oars stand out. Well, this one's only got one showing, and the oar is wider at one end than the other, and this one's got two. One's at a jaunty angle. You only need to suggest them. I'll just make the blades at the other end. The first one's on a trolley. If you're worried about doing a round wheel, just make it deeper in the sand. So I'm just going across, and then it's got a stalk. It's got a bar coming forward that will come somewhere near the front of the boat, so we'll put a mark in to aim for. And then it's got a dark rubber tyre. So I now need to put shadows in underneath, which I'm going to do slightly in bluey grey. For the dune grass, I'm cleaning my palette. I'm just picking up everything that I've already used to put down, and I'm going to start in the middle and then work out. Just put a few little lines in, make a cluster, and they go quite high in places. Change colour, keep changing colour. And put some in the very front. Change to raw sienna or yellow ochre, anything warm, because it'll break it up against the sand. Do the same again. Just bring some forward, help fill the space. Different directions. I've got a bit more work to do to the wall, so I won't go too far that way. I'm changing to a green now, make it a bit darker with some French ultramarine. There are areas at the front here that are darker green. I don't know whether it's a different grass or whether it's a more sheltered position, and some at the front that are darker green. I still want the sand to show, and then I'm going back with lighter green again, so I'm going to add some Naples yellow. Just break up all this dark green here and go further to the left. it breaks up the sand and leads you into the picture. And then I'll put some in the middle. I'm just going to add a little bit of blue, just watering it down a bit. And then a little bit more warm colour. So I'm going to add Indian yellow to some of the raw sienna I had earlier. And that just gives a lift. I'm now going round finding little highlights. And to separate these better, there's a little bit of rocky outcrops on them. And slightly warmer green at the bottom. I'm just going to put that in. Yellow and then wipe it out again. Use a tissue, just take some of it back. And the boats haven't got any masts at the moment. Now masts are usually metal and they often shine grey or white, but they're not going to show up very well as white. So I'm going to go in very gently with a little bit of grey, just give the suggestion of a mast. And here I'm going to put a little bit more of the sky colour underneath the palm tree, just to give the picture a little bit of a lift. Now I don't want to smudge the palm tree, so it's got to be one touch and move on. And then go to the area of the lighthouse. Which makes the lighthouse show a bit more as well. And up to the cloud. I haven't done much, but it now leads you into the lighter area. And I'm going to increase the dune grass to this dinghy. In my oil that I'm using as a reference, the grass does come further around. It just masks the trolley a little bit, make a difference to the sand colour. So what I'm going to do is just put in some very dark green and leave what circles showing the sand. Just to give the illusion of something growing there. Now I've got to return to the garden wall and make that more regimented. So I'm using Naples yellow and the grey from earlier. Just going along, making marks to show that there's a wall, and then I'll put a different colour through them the other direction. So I'm going to use a little bit of the grass colour just for harmony. Do the brush sideways and then clean the brush off. Just merge it a little bit and it gets darker towards the bottom. So I've got some of the brownie mixture here. And I'll use some Payne's grey and some of the blue. And just put in some more chunks of rock. Don't need to show every one, but just a little bit more Naples yellow. Do the same again, just add chunks. And then it changes to concrete about here. So I need to drop something stronger into there to show it is stones. So I'm going to drop some raw sienna in. I'm coming forward, this seems to have been repaired, this wall. This is pristine and it's got the stones on top, the capping stones. So I'm just using grey and yellow ochre just to reinforce what I did earlier, and then change the brush to the other direction. And then there's lots of rock that comes down onto the beach, so I'm going to use grey and just put in random stones. And I need to make those a bit darker, so I'm just going to add some Payne's grey. Any dark colour will do. Now to reinforce that, I'm going to make the hedge darker. So I'm going to mix up a nice dark green with sap green and indigo and drop in the bottom of the hedge and then make it lighter towards the top. It's in its own shadow. So I'll go in at the bottom, very wiggly line, going back the other way, and then adding some of the other colours I've just used, just to give harmony. Neat yellow ochre there, and just drop that in. Then take the dark again and just join them up a little bit further. Let it find its own way. And I've got some very grey-green plants coming over the wall. So I'm using a weak bluey green mixture. And then there's some more yellow plants hanging over, just up to the gateposts. And more pink plants on top, which I used rose madder for earlier, and it needs a second coat. Make it a bit brighter. You get lots of these pink flowers in Scilly. I'll just use a little bit of water to take those round. And then underneath them there's a little bit of everything, so I'll just use a mid green. Just put a few dark lines in. And I'm going to make the first lot of foliage just a bit bolder, just to separate it from everything around. Just putting a wash on top. And again with the plants on top of the hedge here. Make it a bit bolder. Lose the line. I'm just using a dry brush and putting the paint on at random and bringing it down into the foliage below so it's not lost. And then above the pink flowers there's lots of flowers from the other side of the garden showing, but you can't make out what they are, so I'm just going to do green and yellow marks just to cover the white paper. Returning to the house, I'm just going to warm up the stonework and define the window. Some Naples yellow and some of the grey that I've already got on the go. I just put in some marks on the edge to show that it's got nice stonework, keystones. Well built for an exposed position. I'm going to change to a bigger brush. I need to show those stones a bit more, so I'm going to use raw sienna. Well, there's 4 or 5 showing. Just put them in. And there's a lintel there. And then the whole top is in shadow, so I need a clean grey. So I'm just using a Payne's grey, and I'm going to put a line completely across the top. Now it's all dry now. So I'm just going around looking for little areas that I can highlight. And on my original reference, the foliage on the house came all the way up to the roof. So now that everything else is dry, I can add a suggestion of greenery all the way up here. And there is a white weatherboard all the way around to protect the tiles from winter storms. So I'm going to use a number 2 brush, and in this case I'm going to use a little bit of white gouache. You could put latex down if you wanted to, just a tiny bit of white gouache, and just put a suggestion. Let's go back a little bit more. It is quite unusual to have the weatherboard up the side as well, but it is a very exposed position. The way to make the 2 islands separate is to have light against dark, and in this case, if you want to separate it a bit more, just add a little bit of yellow and just separate it along the top, and it definitely looks nearer now. And the same with the flowers. If you've got dark and light together, it all helps. So you can go along around these stone posts, just put a few little tickles of paint, as many as you like, and then where it's catching the sun, just make things a bit richer in colour. And the parasol shows, because that was put in first, in cool colours, and the rest of the plants are warm colours. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and that you'll take a day trip to the Isles of Scilly yourself. Thank you very much for watching.